And we are live. Good morning and a very warm welcome to a somewhat overcast Johannesburg. Rain slightly on my way in at about 6 a.m. So for those of you in the Johannesburg area, please stay warm, stay dry, stay safe. Welcome to all our delegates from hopefully around the country and potentially from outside of the country. And we'll ask you on the chat forum a little while if you are from outside the country where you come from. It's my absolute pleasure as the CEO of the Institute of IT Professionals to welcome you all to our today's webinar from our special interest group in artificial intelligence and robotics. And with us is the chairperson of that special interest group, Johan Steyn, who will carry on with introductions in a moment. Johan is also the chairperson of our Gauteng chapter. With us at the moment is Jade Abbott, and I'll ask Jade, or Johan will ask Jade to introduce herself, I think. We are waiting for Dr. Vukosi Marivate from University of Pretoria, who I believe is stuck in traffic. So hopefully he will join us soon. So from IITPSA, a warm welcome to our members and all non-members who are attending the event today. We do hope you find it interesting and challenging and thought-provoking. Please join us on the chat group in terms of comments and questions. And Johan, without further ado, over to you.
Danny, thank you. And as always, to you and your team for helping us arrange these events and all the admin happening in the background. It's always a great honor to work with the IITPSA. And as Tony said, Dr. Vukosi is joining us late, but I'll formally introduce him when he joins. Just a few remarks before we start. So obviously today we're talking all about chatbots or natural language understanding or natural language processing. You know, if we think of the evolution, for many years now, we've used our hands to type on keyboards, to give instructions to computers. And the evolution is now where we use our voices to speak to our mobile phone devices or to our laptops or computers. And some of you might remember many years back, I think it was called Drag and Dictate. Jade, I don't know if you remember that, but the pain was when you installed the software, you had to spend hours and hours to train the software so that it can recognize your own accent, your own way of speaking, and it was hugely frustrating. These days, I mean, if you speak to Siri or Alexa or other devices, it's almost from the very first time you speak to it, 100% accurate. So I think the technology has really come a long way. So we used our fingers, now we're using our voice, and where the future is going, they reckon, is we're going to use our brains to interact with technology. And here we're speaking about brain-computer interface or implants. Still a bit of a science fiction thing, but Elon Musk and others are already experimenting with it. So that would be interesting. Even Facebook said they want to get to a place where you can update your status by just thinking about it. It is a little bit scary. But let me get going on the conversation of today. And I'm sure everyone on this webinar is using their voice, again, whether it's just asking your Siri or Alexa, whatever, for directions, or what is the weather going to be like tomorrow. The challenge we have in South Africa and in Africa is that, and across the world really, is that minority languages, indigenous languages, are not represented in this technology. They reckon there's between 2,000 and 3,000 different languages being spoken on the African continent. And even if we just think of the myriad number of languages here in South Africa. So the challenge we have is a lot of these platforms are Northern American or European platforms. But what do we do with people who can only speak their native language or might speak some English, but really only understand their own native language best? If we think of the societal impact, even my son, who is 7, I've now taught him how to use our Google Home device to ask questions to help him with his homework. So from an educational point of view, there's so much we can do. Think of healthcare. Think of people living in an outlying area where they either cannot afford a doctor or doctors are just too far away, but they might be on an okay mobile network and they want to ask the AI for some medical advice. But now it's not represented in their own language. And that's why I'm so excited today to have our two guests. I'm going to start with Jade, and we'll introduce Vukosi when he joins. So Jade is the machine learning lead at Retro Rabbit, also previously the finalist of the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans, and she works with Vukosi in an organization called Masakhane, where she's the NLP researcher for African languages. Now, Masakhane, I'm sure we'll touch on that a bit more, but it's essentially a grassroots organization whose mission is to strengthen and spur natural language processing research in African languages. And I see Vukosi has joined us. How are you? Good to see you, Vukosi.
Sorry about that. Coming into campus, very early. This is the first time in a long time this early, and I didn't know that this traffic was this bad. Again, so.
And of course, good to see we've got Tony Perry, who's the CEO of the IITPSA. Okay. We just started with some introductory remarks, so your timing is not too bad. I've just introduced Jade. So Dr. Vukosi Marivate is the ABSA Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria, the co-founder of the Deep Learning Indaba, a data science and natural language processing researcher, the chief investigator at Masakhane. I've just mentioned that, and also the joint winner of the inaugural 2021 Wikimedia Foundation Research Award of the year. Both of you, it is an absolutely great honor to have you spend some time with us at the IITPSA. Now, I've introduced you, but I want to ask you to introduce yourself because I might have missed some things. And Jade, let me ask you, what have I missed? You're also lecturing, you're doing a lot of societal things. So maybe tell us a bit about yourself.
I think you mostly covered it. Yeah, no, that was decent. I am also lecturing at Wits, but that's very, very recent. Vukosi?
Yeah, thanks, Johan, and thanks, great for joining and being hosted on here. I guess the only other thing is for me, being in machine learning research for just over a decade now, and then also working at the University of Pretoria now as the chair of data science. So that's also very interesting in terms of both doing research and then teaching. And both, I think Jade and I are going through the end of the year blues when it comes to teaching. This is a crazy week. I think exams are starting now. Look forward to the conversation.
And of course, you've also spent some time overseas, if I'm not mistaken, Harvard or elsewhere. Maybe just from an academic career point of view, just give us some highlights.
Yeah, sure. I did, after I finished my master's at Wits, I then joined the CSIR for about 8 months. I was actually in their Joburg office, which was a nice and secluded office in Mill Park. And after that 8 months, I took a leave of absence for 6 years. I moved to the US at Rutgers University in New Jersey to then do my PhD in reinforcement learning, which is a fun part of AI. Very tough, but it's fun. And during that period, then also got the opportunity to just try and understand, especially from the startup side, what was going on. So spent one summer in Silicon Valley as an intern, ended up interning at Google at their HQ, and then also spending some time in New York City interning at a ed tech company called Newton on there. So those are were very interesting because those were the very early days of even the moniker data scientists showing up. So then got to spend some time actually working on either AI tools or data science pipelines in a production environment. So yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. We're glad you came back because we need all the talent we can get in South Africa and in Africa, Vukosi. Jade, let me ask you, for people on the webinar, because we hear about chatbots, we hear about conversational AI, natural language understanding and the like. If you have to explain what NLP or NLU is, and I think most people on this webinar are from a tech background, but for people who might not have a clue, what's the best way to explain what this technology is and maybe what it is not?
So I think the simplest way to understand it is it's just basically doing smart things for text and for language. So it's doing AI, but specifically around text, specifically around language. When people are talking about natural language understanding, we're really talking in the context of chatbots. So that's how can a computer extract information and understand what it is you're saying so that it can give you, the information that you need. And we typically use a whole bunch of techniques in order to achieve this. So there are some kind of classic techniques, which are not very machine learning focused, all the way up to like the latest machine learning developments. So yeah, so in a summary is all it is. It's just, machine learning and AI that's been focused on kind of helping you communicate with your devices.
Okay. So if I say what I type or what I say is understood by the technology, that's maybe a way of saying it. Of course,
understood.
Okay, yeah, understood.
Quotation marks.
I want to touch on that during this conversation, because I think that contextual understanding, like we do when we speak to each other, because we see facial expressions and there's so many little nuances around certain languages, which I think is most likely, I assume, difficult to teach a computer to do. Because what I want to ask you is, firstly, how far has this technology advanced? And as a follow-up, why is it such a big problem that minority languages are not represented? I know it is, but if you can explain to us why that is. Because I want to start with why it is a big problem before we start talking about the solutions and the things that both of you are working on.
Typically when I'm interacting with people who are not natural language processing researchers and are old enough to have gone through the early days of search engines, I use search engines as the example. So if we go back 20 years, on the part of the early 2000s, one of the things people would remember is the early days of search engines, where you had to learn Yahoo Foo or Google Foo to search, right? You had to figure out what is the best way for me to put in keywords in such a way that I get a result that makes sense to me, right? Because the systems at that time, they were still a very primitive in a way. You're just looking inside a bunch of documents and you're searching in there. Google might have come in with some innovations with PageRank just to kind of try to bubble things up a little bit better, but you still had to figure out, how do I structure my search so that, so if you then fast forward to now, right, we are at the point where you're also putting into any search engine, I'm not advocating for any specific one, almost what you would ask for to another human or a librarian. Like if you walked up to a librarian and said, I am looking for something like this, and then the results come back and you're like, that's you've gotten used to it now, that it's almost like you're trying to type in natural language the way that we would ask or speak, kind of in a way. So that should give you really how far we've come, and to the point now that where you've got these virtual assistants that you can talk to, and they also now go in and say, we can go from speech to text and then connect it the other way, come back with the results, try to interpret that result in terms of, given your query, if you are asking, like I was yesterday with one of my babies, they've got a blister, what should I be doing? And then they respond, and they don't just respond with the web page, but now they try to tell you what you're supposed to do, right? And that breaks in different ways, and sometimes very interestingly, because it did break with the blister on that part. But then now, this is a world that we're kind of living in that's in English, and we've gotten used to that, right? Again, we are still adjusting to the technology, meaning at the beginning you have to learn Google Foo, but right now it's like, if you really want to interact with all these great new things, if you want your email to auto complete, all that stuff is built in English. So now that is leaving out a huge part of the world, like really the majority of the world, to really benefit from these gains that we've had in natural language. And to do that, you need to have a lot of foundational technologies that are built in those languages, and we don't have that, right? So if you were thinking, my wife has a Indabele heritage, and if we use Indabele as the benchmark, now we go like, okay, if I need to build a knowledge graph, what do I need? I need the Wikipedia or wiki graph to do that. But there is no wiki graph in this Indabele. Right. So there's no, you can now resolve what's the capital of South Africa in Indabele. Like literally it won't. Before you even say, let's build basic tools that just give us representations of texts in Indabele, there's 0 articles in Wikipedia in Indabele. And I'm not saying there's no other places, but that's a good heuristic, because again, people use Wikipedia so much, and you take it for granted, but 0 kind of in that language. And that's where we start beginning of saying, how then do we resolve these foundational issues that have to be taken care of?
I remember to your point in the early days when you had to search, you had to quotation marks, word, and so it was a mission to find stuff. And now, obviously, with the likes of Google and others learning what you're searching for, I mean, you just start typing it, and it already suggests almost always accurately what I'm going to look for, which is a bit scary. And of course, you touched on it, Jade. I want to ask you, how difficult is it to build the technology? I almost, if I want to use a metaphor, say the NLP is an engine, but the behind the scenes petrol, I assume, is the data. Now, we've got enough petrol for English, but of course you mentioned Tabele, or if you think of other languages, what is the stuff we need, and how difficult is it to get it, or do you almost have to build it from scratch to get NLP to work with African languages?
At the moment, it mostly is a matter of building from scratch. As Vukosi noted, there isn't much Wikipedia, and there are some websites, but not many. And if we look at English, you know, data in English is a commodity. We can go, like, the tool we're using right now, everything is in English, right? And so what it becomes one of two things. It becomes either a data creation exercise, which is odd for NLP practitioners, because NLP practitioners tend to scrape data if we're working with English. We don't tend to generate data. And so we've got this data creation exercise of how can we create novel data, or it becomes what I call data archaeology, where we do have data that does exist, but it's in small amounts and it's often undigitized. So typically what we find we're doing is we're, you know, going and meeting with professors of linguistics and finding old books and digitizing it. Vukosi's got the story of a book of, I think it's idioms in, I can't remember if it's Setswana. It was a
Tsonga.
Yeah. And now has to, you know, wants to go digitize that. Not only is it an exercise of, you know, digitizing it, it's also an exercise of, you know, talking to the publisher, trying to find the publisher. Sometimes these books are very old, to try and get hold of it. We've got a really interesting story where we know we can get a lot of data from the South African government because they actually write down a fair amount of their parliamentary proceeding in all 11 official languages. And the only way we could get access to it is we actually have, as part of Masakhane, a translator who's working for Parliament. And that's, you know, part of this archaeology session, is trying to get this data out of Parliament, which should be accessible by everyone. And so we found it's a very intensive process. What is quite nice is that, unlike English, where we've got the whole, you know, whatever's on the internet is on the internet. That's all we get. And to be fair, the internet isn't exactly, it's got things like Wikipedia, which is amazing, but it also has a lot of toxic content like Reddit. And this has been influencing the language models that people have been building, to the point of people advising that they don't include that data when they're training these models. You know, it's actually quite a complex process. With African languages, we kind of get an opportunity to start from scratch. We get an opportunity to set the stage and start it the way we want, to create the right data to ensure that our models are representative, to ensure that they're non-toxic. And while this is a very arduous process to actually create this data, I'm hoping that the results will be really great.
Okay. Seems like a lot of hard work, but important work. Tony, I quickly want to ask you, I've been in the background, been getting WhatsApps from people who say they can't join. If I could maybe ask you to just take the joining link, the public joining link in the chat here, and then I can send it on to people. I don't know why their links are not working or whether they don't have it. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay, super. Guys, what about the topic of bias in data? I mean, I think we've been thinking of facial recognition. We've been seeing a lot of these big tech firms almost pulling back on it. We've been seeing the policing, the wrongful arrests. I always joke that I think a lot of this tech is created by a bunch of white geeks in Silicon Valley. So no wonder it struggles to pick up darker skin tones or female faces. You know, that's a huge problem. Of course, maybe to you, is bias in a data set applicable and a problem when it comes to NLP?
Yes, as I like, I've said, like, there's two parts. So let's talk about the general example that I use with the search engine. So what the search engines are trying to do now, or the what are these things, these virtual assistants, is now they try to interpret what the result is, connected to what your query was, and then show you what they think is the most important snippet in the web page, which has its own issues, because people then don't visit web pages anymore. They just see what the search engine responds to them. But then now you've got a child, they've got this blister, you ask, what's the worst that could happen with the blister? And then the result comes back and it's voiced out. But then what if it voices out and says, here's the advice. But then when you go to the web page, actually, there was the section that says, do not do this, and then lists the things that you shouldn't do. But then the system read back and said, no, do this, right? Because this shows you that this is maybe something that is somewhat on the edges of the understanding, right? So there is some bias. It doesn't know how to deal with this, reads it, and then it doesn't understand. It picks out a pattern that is actually not applicable to the web page and then responds, right? So that's just something that happens, and it's been shown to sometimes happen in very bad situations. And on the part, this one maybe is I was like this, looking at my phone, going like, no, that's completely wrong on that part. But then just imagine that automated decision making that's working on natural language understanding, where now the machine is supposed to be able to comprehend what was a query and then what the answer is supposed to be. That bias, that mistakes, that the errors that are there carry on. Now, if we think about low resource scenarios or low resource languages or places that we don't we don't have a lot of data now, this then gets amplified, right? So you could be, you could be in isiZulu on the part, and then I will, we have isiZulu, but then we now want to sort out how we understand food from West Africa. So let's talk about the Jollof debate, right? So which Jollof, yeah. So now you try to say, hey, I would like to understand Jollof in isiZulu. This is not a thing of it's just there's not enough data that you will find on that in the first place. But then now, because there's not even a kind of enough foundational data, that query completely is out of the window. Okay. Right, and these are examples that I'm using that are more kind of safe, but then you can think about them as, just imagine now if you're needing a decision to be made on that part. I think on Twitter a couple of times now I've shared really bad translations. There was one with Tito Mboweni a few weeks back, where he was just saying, hey, people say he never goes to the village, and then here I'm going to the village, and it's written in Xitsonga. But the translation was completely out of it. It was like, wow, if somebody was reading this, they would it's completely out of the way. Yesterday, I think there was one about ESCOM and getting in Setswana a bad audit finding. But the way it's written is, I think it said, ESCOM has an anti-vacuum. Right? And then the point is, a lot of these systems now are automated, right? What you don't have a choice. As you go through the internet, they automatically translate for you. But the translation that comes up is wrong, right? And it's very hard in machine translation, especially because now we're doing it in kind of a statistical way, to catch those errors. And now for languages that are low resource, this becomes something that could be dangerous. We've seen it in places where now an interpretation of a concept could be completely wrong and could change the opinions of people about something, because they don't know what the original language is anyway. So they're just reading the translation. And that kind of error can be life-changing for people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to encourage everyone to add questions. We'll definitely get to it, and I definitely want to get to more of the business application. What I want to touch on next, guys, is the call it privacy and ethics. So I mentioned earlier that my 7-year-old taught him now to use Google Home. He's having interesting conversations. The other day I had a bunch of his friends over, and they're all Zulu speaking, and I had such a laugh because I was sitting in my study working, and the device is in the living room. So, hey Google, and then they speak to the device in isiZulu, and I can hear the response is taking so much longer. Now, I don't know what the device said, but these kids were laughing their butts off, so apparently the translation was very bad, but think of this, a few years back, there was this Google platform. So you could use your Alexa or your Google Home device, and obviously through your mobile app, you connect it, and then the child could ask questions to the device. For instance, for the Google device to tell its stories. So you might have Google blocks that represents a farm or or office building, and you might say, Lego, please tell me a farm story. And then it would say, which farm story you want to hear? I've got one about Uncle Bob and one about a big cow and blah, blah, blah. And then the child would say, I want the big cow. But then, so as the child is now building and listening to the story, the device is also asking it questions. Now, the child starts confiding into the device. So it might say where it lives. It might say which school it goes to. It might give out all kind of personal information. And I read quite a big article about Google and other platforms, Lego and other platforms like this, about how obviously it's imperative to protect that information. We've read over the lockdown period how the increase of pedophiles online, grooming of children. So that's where, for me, where the privacy and the ethics comes in, because a child is now telling this device things that no one should ever hear. So Jade, let me ask you on that. How do we protect people and children when they interact with this kind of technology?
Yeah, you make such a great point. And there's a whole bunch of really valuable research that's being taking place around children and AI, because that question goes all the way back to, if we're building technologies to capture, to work with children, then we need to capture their voices. And already we're then violating privacy, because now we've permanently stored children's voices in a data set, which can then be used to train. So there's a number of workbooks which are being released. I think there's one by Sipit Stratmore, who are a really great kind of AI and legal think tank in Kenya, and another by Alt Advisory, who are a South African-based kind of digital human rights think tank, kind of just looking into that. And so a more general thing is like a more general solution to this is actually quite difficult. The fact that children can use these tools unaccompanied is quite dangerous. And I think one of the key things that I think about is where this data is stored. Because what happens typically now is that it leaves, you speak into the Alexa device, that data goes off to the cloud. Cloud will do translation or do some analysis. It'll probably get stored there, and then the response will come back. And what we really need to be thinking about is how can we empower these edge devices to, first of all, store the data there so that it can be deleted, and so that it actually never leaves here. Because what's even worse is that not only does it leave your device, it probably leaves the continent. And once it's left the continent, it's unlegislated, right? It is legislated under someone else's jurisdiction. And so keeping it in kind of having a data governance kind of perspective to say, okay, well, maybe the data shouldn't leave the device. Maybe before anything ever gets saved off-site, it needs to be reviewed by the parent. The processing should take place on the device so that it doesn't have to leave it. So kind of thoughts around that is that we're never going to get past the point of if kids are going to be engaging with these devices, then we need to ensure that they're at the very least, that their data is protected. And that they can have the opportunity to delete them.
Somebody asked me on the webinar a few months back, I'm creating a digital footprint for my boy without his permission. Now, it's a bit of a funny comment because, there's clearly benefit to him, as I said, with his homework and stuff. But we are creating this digital footprint. We only started getting a digital footprint once in our 30s or 40s, depending on your age. But, now they're very young. And this data will always be there somewhere, to your point, Jade. Of course, you've got are they girls, the twins? And they're young, they're less than a year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. yeah, for the almost 6 months now.
Well, I've got a busy job, you and your partner. When you think of their future, given the topic we're speaking about now, digital footprint for kids, protection, and so forth, I mean, will you try and teach them as early on as possible to use this tech, and maybe also how do we teach them to be careful? Just your thoughts as a father of children and this kind of technology.
So there's a couple of things I think that comes in here, and most of it comes down to how the internet economy kind of interacts with the rest of our lives. So on one part, it's understanding, like, let's think about from a machine learning perspective, where we think about leakage, data leakage. So just me being a father or a parent, actually, in general, you leak small bits of information about your family members in one way kind of or another, even if that member doesn't, let's say, completely stays off the internet. But that leakage then, unfortunately, there's then companies who have a very big financial incentive to then build models to identify your family members, right? So whether they've joined or not, it doesn't really matter. And to the point where if you take it to its extreme, if that person later on joins the internet, they will then go like, oh yeah, this is the person, right? That we've been waiting for the last 5 years. So in that, it becomes two parts. So one, going back to Jade's note on data governance, we need to have data governance within our countries to make sure that there's limits to what can be done by these companies, right? So in the case of just typing and talking about family members via text, it is being processed, and then that is building models and updating these models, right? The simplest way to do it is if you have children while they're waiting for them to be born, your internet changes very, 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 very quickly to start selling you lots of different things, right? Just because now they figured out that, hey, somebody in your family might be pregnant. We need to now start very quickly bombarding you with all these different ads, because they know for pregnant people or people who are about to become parents, they are actually a worthwhile customer, right? Once you hook them in, they will make you a lot of money on that part. So there has to be governance that then puts limits on what's allowed. And then also that brings society into the conversation. What is it that our society in South Africa expects the behavior to be of internet companies in this space? The second one is then going to be, we have to have digital education about now what happens when you're online. So I can make a choice that I think is a little bit more informed, right? I stand to be corrected of the decisions I make online and things like that, and how I navigate what gets shared, how it gets shared, and what I remove. And this then also extends to most likely now having conversations with other family members on what the limits are of what they can share, right? Because as I said, it's not about you anymore. It's anybody in your family. If they share something that you wanted to be private, it's already now in there, can't be forgotten or won't be forgotten even if, like, it might be forgotten in public, but in private, somebody keeps that model and says, we know this little factoid on that part. So with the children, it will be the same thing. We haven't figured out how we're going to do it, but we know that it's going to be something of teaching them these things, of saying, like, this is how the internet works. This is how computing-driven internet works. And these are choices you have to make, and be careful of some parts. It can be beautiful in one space. We've created and cultivated these online communities that are thriving and all. But then on the other side, we also need to think about what happens when you fall into one of the internet ditches and you can't get out. And it's a place where it feels lonely, because it seems so few people might be feeling that they're getting on the negative side. But it is something where then you need to have almost a safety net that's guaranteed by our governance in the country.
Is the country and the government doing enough in this space at the moment? Because I don't know of anything being done, but I might be misinformed. Of course, let me ask you. Enough legislation in the government?
If we think about the African continent, there's something called the Malabar Convention, which is kind of data protection and security for the African continent. It was, I think, signed in as that policy document in 2014 I stand to be corrected, I think 2014. As of today, only 8 countries on the continent have ratified it. Right, and this covers privacy, data use, all those things on that part. Why is this important? If you go to places like the EU, and then we all know about the GDPR, and now the upcoming AI policies that are coming from the EU, because they work as a block, they can then go to the big internet companies and say, for any citizen who's in any of our countries, these are the minimum standards that you have to follow. So for us, it's very easy for if something does, like, is not allowed in South Africa, I'll just move and start working in another country on the African continent. And this then makes it hard, it's really, you have to be going does it make money sense to comply with the South African government? So we might have POPIA, but POPIA is really on data use, especially in privacy. But are we talking about automated decision making with your data? Are we talking about something these are not things that really are in discussion. And some of it is also connected to, do the policymakers actually understand the technologies? Right. This is a very fundamental challenge. We can think about finance and how in finance there's a lot of regulation, right? Even if it doesn't, we know about all the scandals, it doesn't go mostly at far poly, it can be, but there's an understanding that the policymakers understand what's going on in finance in such a way that they can regulate the industry. And I think with AI, with machine learning, the technologies have come into our lives before we've had the time for the society to really understand how they work, and for the policymakers to really be able to build up governance on that part. So you can't have, almost 8 years later, 8 years later, only 8 countries on the continent, South Africa is not one of them, having ratified a policy that's supposed to be Africa-wide to make it easier for us to also be able to deal with this. Because then there's another part of it of saying, we are in this information age, and there's ways that economies can grow from information, but it has to be under a governance that allows for us to have sovereignty of that data. At the moment, that's questionable.
Yeah.
Right. What happens on most of these services that you use online, where it's like, oh, you're providing data, but this data is not stored in your jurisdiction. So yeah, if something goes wrong, good luck getting any recourse.
And I always smile when people talk about all these amazingly free applications that we use. And why is it free? Because they want our data. They want to Waze wants to see where we are driving, and obviously what we're searching, and food we're buying, and all that. In the time we have left, I want to pivot a bit to the business application of this technology, because I think there are people on the webinar who have either started investigating or even implementing this. One might say in a call center, which I think is a great candidate for some of these technologies. And I wanted to also talk about conversational design, because I think just having the tech, just signing up to a platform somewhere is only the start. Now, I recently had, and I did a bit of a ranting video on YouTube about it, and I got some interesting replies. But for the first time in months, my fiber line was down about a week and a half ago. And I always say, with mostly working from home, it's almost like you go to your car in the morning to get to meetings, and then you realize your car is broken, it doesn't start, the tires are flat, or something like that. So we have to have internet. So this service provider only had a WhatsApp chat line. I couldn't speak to a human, and I'm very happy to do that as long as it's good and accurate. But so it comes up with first, I WhatsApp it and it greets me by name. So it already knows who I am, because it's got my cell phone number on record. So I was very pleased with that. And then it says, what is your problem? And then give me, your internet is slow, my internet is down, I've got a billing problem, etc. So I picked my internet is down. And then it asked me, so what product do I have with them? And that's the first time I started thinking, but you should know, is it a fiber line? Is it LTE, etc.? So I said fiber. And then it asked me, then I had to go through the router, all the typical, fault finding. And then it says, no, okay, we can't fix your problem. We're going to put you through to a human agent. I was very happy about that, because this is now an hour later, but it's still WhatsApp chatting. So the human agent pops up, and I'm actually at the billing department. Okay, so the billing department says, sorry, you've come through the wrong department. We're going to put you through to technical support. So now remember, I've already in this interaction given so much info about what's wrong. And then when I finally got to the technical advisor, I think it was he says, hello, Johan, again. Wow, that's impressive. What can I help you with today? And by then I wanted to jump through the roof, because the what you need to help me with, I've now answered so many times. Any case, at the end of the day, it took about 2 hours of WhatsApp chatting, and every time it's seven minutes to get a reply. So I'm just telling that story because just having this tech without making sure how we're going to use it, what is that user story, what is that conversational design, is in itself not enough. So Jade, let me ask you, and also perhaps you can maybe talk about some of the things you do at Retro Rabbit. I don't know how applicable it is to what I've just speaking about, but it's really guiding organizations on, okay, here's the great tech. How you use it is a whole other ballgame. What would you say?
Yeah, so I love that story because it's such a common story. Because what it is, I mean, if you think about, if you've been talking to a human, you've been passed through departments, you have to do the same thing, right? You have to re-explain every single department. And so what they've done is they haven't looked at the problem holistically. They haven't done, the conversational or even just any sort of user experience design to kind of look at this whole problem and go, actually, we need to change the process. And there's no amount of tech that you can just throw at this problem that's going to make it go away. It's actually just a people problem. And so one of my favorite things is watching all the things that people love to use AI with, where they shouldn't be, they don't need to. And another good example of this is a friend of mine wanted to understand, she was working on a project and they wanted to understand the sentiment of people who were, sending in these, some sort of messages. And so they were building a custom sentiment analysis and they were doing this whole deal and it was going to take months. And she's a user experience designer. And she was like, why don't we just, on the interface, add a little button that says happy face, sad face. And then people can click that and then we'll know the sentiment and we don't have to guess. And so, and this is kind of a lot of the work we do at Retro. So Retro Rabbit kind of do kind of digital products, kind of end to end. So there we've got, user experience designers and software engineers and data people, and we all like to work together. And my favorite thing is to have an entire AI idea completely trashed by a user experience person going, you don't need that. What you need is a button. And this happens quite a lot. And I think we need to just slow down. I've got many theories about how we're using AI in places where you don't really need it. What you needed actually was some very clever user experience and design thinking teams to come together and kind of sort your problem out first with some very basic technology. And so, the story about waiting 7 minutes for a reply, having to repeat everything all the time. This is clearly a user experience failure, and no amount of AI is going to solve that. You can have the smartest AI and it doesn't matter because you sat there for an hour already. And by the time you get to the human, they don't know all the stuff you've said. So, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, look, and I've seen it in my consulting career many times where, because I'll work in AI and robotics. I call it sexy topic, so it's fairly easy to get customer meetings. And then they first, I don't know what I always start with. So when we talk about AI, robotics, process automation, what do you understand? I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Almost always the understanding is totally misaligned. Okay, that's a good place to start. Then, what problems are we trying to fix? We're not too sure. We have been told to put in AI into our customer-facing applications.
It's on our middle management checklist. We need to check it off so that we have the AI.
Because bonuses are coming up, so we better do what we've been asked to do. I think that's why there's also a lot of negative sentiment in organizations when it comes to smart automation and smart technology, because it doesn't always work. They don't get the cadence. I always say the best change management is start somewhere small. If you think of process automation, people fear it because they think they'll be replaced, which is not necessarily the case. Now they see, oh, my job's actually much easier. I don't have to do all these stupid reports on a Sunday night. Now the word starts spreading, and now you get cadence. But to just slap AI on something will not work. We know that. I quickly want to pop through to, in the 15 minutes we have left, to some questions, guys. Firstly, from Rakesh, who I know from joining us from India. He's involved in a number of interesting things, amongst other things, an organization called Code Geeko. So they do fascinating work around STEM education. A very nice platform that they have. Rakesh, I'm glad you're here. Earlier, we spoke about edge, maybe keeping the data on the device, but he asked a very relevant question. What if we don't have enough capacity to process on the device, which I think is to a large extent still the case in many of these devices? Jade, what would you say about that? I think you might be on mute.
For years, Siri has been a chip. Siri itself is a chip on your iPhone. So I actually think we do have the capabilities, and we've explored a fair amount. So the world's talking about these large language models, but there's a fair amount around pruning them and making them very small. So you can run language models in your browser, download it in JavaScript running. You can run it on your device. Android has a fair amount of capabilities to run many of these tools. And a lot of the hardware is now kind of very much competing. So we've got these little GPUs that run your machines, TPUs, edge TPUs, which are Google's ones, that can actually run on your mobile phones. And so I think, yeah, we definitely are at the point where we have enough capacity to run many of these tools on our devices. And yeah, it's actually a very interesting field. There's a part of AI that wants to make all the models bigger and bigger and bigger, terabytes, petabytes, who knows how big these models are. And then there's a very sensible part of the field that's making them smaller and saying, how can we still get the equivalent performance, but on our devices? And they're learning that you can make them a lot smaller and still get quite a lot of processing. And I think what we're seeing anyway is that our devices are just becoming more and more powerful to kind of keep up with these tools anyway. So I would say I think we can very much start running them. We already are running them on our devices.
Okay, all right. Vukosi, before we get to the next question, the future of research in this space. Because it's a very exciting space, and I hope there's enough academics getting involved because we need them. Just some comments on that. Is it funded well enough? Are there people that's excited and interested? What's your view on that?
I think there's a lot. So one part is to understand our reality in the country, that R&D is not as funded as likely it should be. On that part. So the US is a big country, I'll give it that. But if I'm doing my PhD in a department whereby, let's say, there are 50 PhD students in the department, and they're all full-time, meaning you bump into them every day as you're walking the corridor, that changes the way that you think about research. Right? This requires, just imagine how many supervisors it requires, how many professors it requires, and you start seeing the scale. Like the reason that we always come back up talking about, the top universities in the US or in Europe, it's because of this, that you need to have that culture of R&D. Sure, there's other questions that have been put forward about, especially now, given that AI is so much connected to the big tech companies. So the top most valuable companies in the world right now are basically making lots of their money on technology and especially on machine learning on that part. And as such, there's money that's flowing from there into academia. But how much of it is actually going into R&D? In Europe, in the US, most likely there's a good chunk, good enough of a chunk. But if you think about the companies, there's almost the same companies, but on the African continent, they mostly have business and legislative, offices and legal offices. Right? They're not invested in building the R&D here. Like they won't have an office that's adding a new widget to their latest and greatest technology that's based off an African office on that part. It's very few on that part. And this is something that we have to get, because it gives you the context, right? It's the same way as I was interacting once with an organization that was trying to get interns from the university. And then I asked, and I said, it's very funny that in South Africa, the way that you view interns is basically somebody who's going to file photocopies. It literally, when I said, what are the students going to be doing? But I said, your same company in London wouldn't do this. You wouldn't get a master's and PhD student to do this. They would be working on some of your latest technology. And the reason it becomes very clear is because the office that they have in South Africa has nothing to do with the technology. Right? It's almost like we have interns because there's a nice little tax incentive that we get for hosting interns in our company, but they're not going to be building tech, right? And as such, we need to look at this and then find ways to innovate through it. So one, the universities have to be connected to each other. We don't have the dreaming it up and saying I'm going to have 50 PhD students. Not now, maybe not in the 5 years, but then there will be a time if we work together to get to that. There's a lot of young people who are really driving a lot of this technology in South Africa, but they require that they can be supported by also senior researchers who can then assist and mentor them in getting to their full potential. It is something, it's like that. It is, I think, a curse that we have by having a young country is now, where's the middle? Who can then mentor the next generation, right? We can't require all the young people to be seniors, right? People go like, oh, it's nice because you can move very fast, but then it's like all this opportunity to grow somewhat gets lost. And that's the things that I think I work on, both me and Jade are passionate about, is making sure that the next generations don't have to have this curse, right? That they can sit with a problem and be able to spend time and work on it and be good at that. And that's how we're going to fill in a lot of these research gaps on there. So for me, for the people who are on this call, it's find ways to work with academia and build research. How much are you spending on R&D? How much can you then think about how are we taking our company to the future by having an R&D department, even if it might start small, but I think you will get a lot of, for me, I'm interested. We can have a chat, because then we can then go in and say, how do you then structure these to build on? Yeah, without R&D, how are we inventing the future?
Absolutely. Oh, so many relevant points. I can't wait to actually watch this webinar recording, which hopefully will be available in a few days, because both of you have said so many things we're thinking of, and hopefully we've even got delegates who might link with you on LinkedIn or elsewhere and say, I want to help, I want to get involved. I'm going to take, Tony, maybe one or two more questions. What I do want to ask, I think a lot of people on the webinar today are maybe not that familiar with the Institute. So what I would like to do is say, when we've got 3 minutes left, Tony, hand over to you just to maybe do a elevator pitch, if you would, if 3 minutes would be okay. Just some questions on, Ashrik here asks, which is so relevant and close to my heart, how can we use AI to support teachers and learners? We also have on the webinar today, Julie, who's from France, but she's come to South Africa to actually work with communities from a STEM point of view. She runs STEAM and Curious. She actually did a talk at the IITPSA a while ago. This technology should be able to help teachers a great deal, Jade. Well, firstly, we hope they have electricity. Then we hope they have connectivity. I still joke about us being in the second industrial revolution, but I mean the amount of assistance and support this kind of tech can give primary, secondary, even tertiary education is immense. Any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a fantastic researcher. I think she's now head of research at Telkom, Maki Yankees, who did a fair amount of work in this. So she also first comments on this, first we need electricity and first we need internet. And so she did a fair amount of work on just using technology at all to kind of augment the educational process. And her thing was particularly around language. And this has kind of been confirmed in Africa, around the world, that if you teach a kid in their home language, they're going to learn it better. They're going to learn the topic. And this is specifically focused on the STEM field in particular. And so one of the areas where, I see we've got a lot of potential future for this is building kind of language support tools. Right now, you go to, a particular school and you're taught in the language that school supports, and it's usually English or Afrikaans. Or it might be English and one secondary language. And right now, even if we look at, most of the teaching material, it's in English, and we're only very slowly developing, materials in isiZulu, where the current matric exams, when they get translated, they're not translated very well. They're very poor, and far below where they should be. And so the hope for me is seeing how can we create tools that kind of help augment, first of all, the teacher-student relationship, allow, students to ask questions in their own language and have those answered. And while I think we're a long way off, I do think that's kind of the final goal. At least for me, this is something that I've cared about a fair amount. And so those are my thoughts about where, NLP in particular can be used to support teachers and learners.
Okay. So many things to still talk about. I can't believe our time is almost up. But to you, Jade Abbott, Machine Learning Lead at Retro Rabbit, and also Dr. Vukosi Marivate, ABSA Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria. Both of you, very valuable. As I said, I can't wait for the recording to kind of mull through some of the things. You're doing important work. I think of the future of our children. You know, I know we do our jobs to get money to buy things, but we have to also do things for the future, which you both are doing. So it's been a singular honor to have you both here. Thank you for your time. Tony, to you and the team also, thank you so much. And let me hand over to you Tony, just to do that elevator pitch, if you would, and to just close the event, please.
Thanks, Johan. At least you had the courtesy of giving me a 2-minute warning. So I appreciate that. Although I should be able to do this on the fly. So first of all, from IITPSA and from myself as well to Dr. Vukosi and to Jade and yourself, Johan, thank you for a very interesting webinar. Not all of you may know, but languages, human and computer, are very close to my own heart. I actually do speak 2 local indigenous languages, Southern Sotho and Zulu. My Zulu is not great. My Southern Sotho is not too shabby. But so I'm always fascinated, and we speak a lot about communication and the ability to, really the old story of message transmitted and message received, not necessarily the same thing. And I think that's so important in a multilingual country like ours. So very interesting, and thank you both and all 3 of you for a very interesting discussion. Elevator pitch. So IITPSA, we have a lot of members online. So to those who are supporting us, including Stefano Galotta from the UK, amongst others. Julie, yes, you're there as well. Thank you so much. And IITPSA is a professional body for ICT practitioners. We are South African Qualifications Authority recognized, and we are also accredited by the International Federation for Information Processing's International Professional Practice Partnership. Try and say that 10 times quickly. So we have 2 professional designations, professional member and professional CIO. And the whole idea is that we're encouraging professional practice in the world of ICTs, in the world of STEM, particularly in ICTs. Ethical behavior, Johan knows ethics is very close to my own heart, and we've had some interesting discussions about AI and ethics, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more in time to come. So it's about ethical practice in terms of encouraging members to attend. We certainly try and encourage the interests of the day. We have a number of special interest groups, which Johan is the chair of one, artificial intelligence and robotics. We also have cybersecurity, software testing and quality assurance, blockchain and Bitcoin, enterprise architecture, innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. So for the folks who aren't members of the IITPSA, we really do encourage you to attend and to join www.iitpsa.org.za. All the information is there. You can join online, and we have a full online member portal, and it helps members engage with us. So, Johan, that's going to be the 120-second elevator pitch. But thank you to our speakers again and to yourself, and especially thank you to our delegates. I see we've had a great attendance this morning. I really wanted to say this afternoon. We had a great attendance this morning. As Stefano Shane was complaining, he's sitting in the UK, and 8 a.m. here is 6 a.m. there. So certainly a very early start in the webinar. So Stefano, we do appreciate the support. And to anybody else who's in a similar boat, thank you as well. I'm not sure when I think we still have 1 or 2 webinars left in this current calendar year. So do keep an eye on our website, our social media, and our newsletter. From IITPSA, thank you to you all. For those of you going on holiday, be safe, enjoy. If you celebrate Christmas, have a blessed Christmas. And we look forward to seeing you all at our future events, both in this year and in 2022. Take care, everybody, and have an awesome day. Thanks, Johan.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Cheerio for now.